Hurricane Helene ravaged multiple southern states, leaving over 230 people dead and entire cities destroyed. And with Category 5 Hurricane Milton set to make landfall later today, these storms have created enormous new obstacles for how voters will be able to cast their ballots and how local officials will run elections less than a month from now. I'm Sophie from Docket. Let's break down how Hurricane Helene has impacted voting and the measures being taken to ensure voters can still cast their ballots. Helene tore through Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia, and South Carolina, but hit Western North Carolina the hardest. As the highly consequential presidential election rapidly approaches, ensuring ballot access is part of the state's recovery efforts. Executive Director of the North Carolina State Board of Elections, Karen Brinson-Bell, said, "This storm is like nothing we've seen in our lifetimes in Western North Carolina. The destruction is unprecedented, and this level of uncertainty this close to Election Day is daunting." The storm hit as voters were still registering and requesting absentee ballots, with some voters even casting their mail-in ballots as North Carolina starts sending out these ballots on September 20th. The state was forced to close 12 election offices, which processed absentee ballot requests and voter registrations. But as of this week, all of the offices have been reopened. Brinson-Bell confirmed that the state's voting equipment has remained unaffected after the storm. Election officials in Georgia also said that the storm did not do any damage to their voting machines in the Peach State. The North Carolina State Board of Elections unanimously passed a long list of emergency measures on Monday to help Helene victims vote in the 2024 election and ensure election officials can provide accessible, safe, and secure voting options for residents of Western North Carolina. Measures apply to these 13 Western North Carolina counties.
We have had ongoing response efforts with these counties to assess what their needs are, to assess how we can best to continue to deliver voting to all North Carolinians. We may need to take voting to the people because they may not be able to access their voting sites easily. So we have crafted this proposal with input from the county boards themselves. We have had considerable communication and coordination with state emergency management officials to provide us with the data about power outages, road closures, and so much of the struggles to the infrastructure in this part of the state and how we're going to be able to deliver elections.
The emergency measures allow changes to in-person voting, absentee voting, poll worker recruitment, coordination with emergency officials, and more. As allowed by the resolution, the 13 counties can modify their early voting polling places, adding or removing sites and changing the hours and days they are open within the state's established early voting period. For Election Day voting, the board has allowed counties to create voting sites in different precincts for their voters to cast ballots if a county does not have the infrastructure to operate an Election Day site in a certain precinct. The board's resolution makes accommodations for absentee voting as well. County boards of election are allowed to process absentee ballot requests until the day before Election Day. Without this change, the deadline would have been October 29th. Under the measures, voters in these counties or their close relatives or legal guardians are also able to return their completed absentee ballots to a different North Carolina county's election board by 7:30 p.m. on Election Day if they were displaced to another county after the storm. The board emphasized that the county or state board would then ensure that those ballots are delivered to each voter's county board of elections by November 14th, the day before the county canvass, to be counted. A log and chain of custody will be maintained to secure these ballots. The resolution ensures election officials continue to coordinate with the North Carolina Division of Emergency Management to provide election-related aid to the disaster counties, including temporary voting facilities, generators, temporary restrooms, and other needs. The board has the power to pass these measures under a state law, allowing them to exercise emergency powers in a scenario where the normal election schedule has been impacted by a natural disaster. Because the state election board made these emergency changes, Executive Director Brinson-Bell said that every county in the state will start early voting on time as scheduled on October 17th, as well as Election Day voting. The voter registration deadline remains this Friday, October 11th. Brinson-Bell added that while this resolution was important, the board's work is far from over.
There may be further actions that we identify as we further assess the situation, as learn more from the various utility companies about what's possible and what's not possible for early voting or even election day. And then, of course, we will have to consider if there are any actions that need to be taken in order to successfully complete the canvass period for these counties, as this disruption may continue even past election day, obviously.
Beyond these necessary emergency measures passed on Monday, state law already has some accommodations for voters who are victims of a natural disaster. Carolina has a notoriously strict voter ID law, which was reinstated by the Republican justices on the state Supreme Court after the court flipped from a blue to red majority in 2022. However, for voters whose belongings, including a photo ID, may have been lost or destroyed due to Hurricane Helene, there are exemptions to this rule. According to the State Board of Elections, voters impacted by Helene can fill out a photo ID exemption form at their voting site or send the form back with their absentee ballot. Voters should check the box for Exemption 3, Victim of a Natural Disaster, and make sure to sign the form. Additionally, registered voters can visit their county board of election office and get a new photo ID printed on the spot free of charge. As shown by these accommodations, state officials are working nonstop and doing everything they can to ensure that every eligible voter can cast their ballot. But tensions are already high in North Carolina, a critical swing state where polling shows Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump at a virtual tie. Trump has already been laying the groundwork to contest the election and cry election interference or voter fraud if he loses. We know from how Trump reacted to the accommodations states gave voters in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic that he will stop at nothing to exploit tragedies for his own political gain. Here's what North Carolina Democratic Party Chair Anderson Clayton had to say about that potential to MSNBC's Alex Wagner last week.
And former President Trump is one to cry fraud even when there isn't any. And when there was a deadly pandemic that resulted in mass death, he had no qualms about trying to weaponize that. And, precautions, measures taken to keep the vote safe and fair and free, and using those measures to cry foul and to say the election was rigged. Are you at all concerned that the dispensations that will have to happen, the special procedures, whatever needs to happen to get these people, the opportunity to exercise their constitutional right to vote, are you worried about that being seen as an opportunity by the Republican on the ticket to cry foul?
Look, we've already seen Donald Trump say that voter fraud exists in North Carolina, but what we know right now is that we have a board of elections that's made up of nonpartisan and good people from across the state, that they're interested in just making sure that every single person has access to the polls. And it's our job to make sure that we have got a voter protection effort in the state of North Carolina that anyone can have access to in the state to make sure that that your vote is the most important thing to us this election cycle.
Hurricane Milton is intensifying at extraordinary speeds and is set to make landfall on Florida's Gulf Coast later today, while the state is still recovering from the damage of Hurricane Helene. Republican Governor Ron DeSantis declared a state of emergency for 51 of the state's 67 counties on Monday. Florida is unfortunately no stranger to hurricane striking during elections, with November elections occurring during hurricane season. Right before Florida's 2022 midterm elections, Hurricane Ian struck the state. DeSantis issued an executive order after Hurricane Helene, similar to the one issued in 2022 after Ian, which allowed several voting changes, such as relocating polling places, permitting voters to have absentee ballots delivered to a different address, and other accommodations. With Milton underway and the state still recovering from Helene, DeSantis declined to extend the state's voter registration past Monday, October 7th, despite 36 civil and voting rights organizations asking him to. In their statement, advocacy groups said that it is unreasonable to expect people to focus on registering to vote with multiple storms wreaking havoc in Florida. Floridians who are still recovering from Hurricane Helene and today are preparing for Milton. They cannot and should not be expected to have to meet the voter registration deadline, which was Monday. Listen to what DeSantis had to say at a news briefing at the Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee.
In terms of voter registration, people can register today, and then that's that. There's nothing inhibiting you registering today. The storm has not hit yet.
The governor then said that after the storm, he would see what damage is there and consider signing a similar executive order to the ones he issued for Helene and Ian. As voters recover from Helene and brace for Milton, state and federal officials are working to minimize the impact that these devastating hurricanes will have on the 2024 election. These changes to voting and election administration are rapidly evolving, so please contact your state or local board of elections to get the latest and most accurate information regarding your county. Thanks for watching Democracy Docket. To stay up to date on the latest voting and election news, please subscribe to our newsletters. You can click the link right here on the screen or in the description of this video. I'm Sophie, and I'll see you next time.